Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's a balmy 10 degrees here in North Yorkshire, although it's been chucking it down with rain again through much of the night, but seems we've got a bit of a brief respite at 8:30 here at Kirby Misperton. Well, yesterday I was putting forward the proposition that Greg Clark may well be delaying from signing off on this intended frack here on this pad behind me. And as I explained yesterday, and hopefully people have done the research, this is an incredibly rammed pad. It's far too small for what Third Energy are trying to do here. And of course the good news of that is that if they do go ahead with the frack and they do get a reasonable return without actually screwing up somewhere along the line, then they will probably want to come back here and drill a horizontal well, and then at least one, and then frack that well, in which case they will have to expand the pad, which will of course have to go through the appropriate planning process. So yeah, there's many opportunities to still shut down this pernicious abomination from being unleashed beneath this country. And I know a number of people have written to Greg Clark. We put his email addresses underneath the YouTube version of yesterday's live stream, and also under a number of the Facebook posts. So thank you for those who have written to Greg Clark to express your concerns about this. And hopefully Greg Clark's raft of experts that he will have drafted in to go through the documentation will actually be open, honest, and truly recognise that despite the fact that the government wants a particular response from them, that they will uphold their scientific integrity and instruct or advise Greg Clark that this should not be permitted to proceed. Well, another possibility, of course, is that Greg Clark is actually waiting for Justice Morgan to release his verdict regarding the INEOS injunction. Now, although Third Energy are not covered by that injunction, we're certainly not here at Kirby Misperton, although their other well site at Eberston Moor, which was a joint venture with Moreland Energy, which has now been acquired by INEOS, has injunction notices posted all the way down the approach track to that well site. But it would not apply here unless INEOS took an interest, a financial interest in this site. And frankly, even if they do, then that is a prima facie opportunity to absolutely challenge the legality of a ruling that is in favour, if it turns out to be in favour of INEOS. And I think if Justice Morgan does give INEOS the benefit of the verdict, then I think libertarian organisations from right across the country will realise that this is a full-front attack on the fundamentals of democracy, not least Articles 10 and 11 of the European Human Rights Convention, which are embedded into British law under the Human Rights Act of 1998. So if that ruling does go in INEOS's favour, I think it will absolutely escalate the awareness of what is being attempted exponentially. And it certainly isn't going to be taken lying down, or maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what we have to do, to actually lie down and demonstrate that there is not going to be any injunction initiated by the corporations. And, as I started to elucidate on yesterday, unfortunately, it's not just the corporations. We now know that the government and the police colluded with INEOS, and actually, it seems, put forward the recommendation that INEOS pursue this avenue to try and get the injunction to sort of force through this corporate agenda. Now, as I've made the observation before, I know it's an extremely emotive term, but it's a fact, and that is that if a raft of legal rulings are introduced which are effectively riding roughshod over existing legislation, then we will be on the cusp of the fascist state, because the definition of fascism is government by corporations, and that's effectively where we're heading. So if Greg Clark is waiting on that announcement from Justice Morgan, well, I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to work in Third Energy's favour. It might actually be completely detrimental to them, because, as I say, it will raise awareness absolutely exponentially. And as you know, we always encourage, it's really, really important that people do their own research, because you know, the government and this industry relies on people just not having the time, even if they have the inclination, to actually do their research, to look at the bigger picture, to look at what is occurring here. And I think the other aspect to this that the British government is keeping in reserve right now, and that is that there's not a lot of media coverage on what's occurring in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. So we've got Saudi at absolute loggerheads with Qatar. Obviously we got Saudi bombing the crap out of the Yemen, primarily thanks to massive arms sales from the UK. So we have a government that is literally complicit in illegal war, but we've known that for a long time. And of course we have the Saudi Arabia declaration of war on the Lebanon. So the Middle East is potentially in turmoil, and of course that doesn't, I haven't even mentioned yet, the coups that are going on in Saudi Arabia as the ruling family try and cull the opposition within the kingdom. Now the price of oil right now is, I think, $55.99, so $56 effectively, but this is still at least $20 a barrel below what would be viable for the abstraction of unconventional hydrocarbons here in the UK. Now, the reason I think that there's not too much coverage in the British media, I think some of the the Guardian has run a few articles in it, but there's nothing in the right-wing press. And primarily, of course, it's because I think that the British government is a little nervous about people realising that much of what's going on in the Middle East has been facilitated through the sales of armaments from this country. And obviously it's a country that has no conscience. We don't have very much manufacturing left in this country, and what we do have, unfortunately, is primarily destructive. So what you can expect is the British government at some juncture to effectively open the floodgates to the right-wing media and say, okay, now's the time, let's make a big deal about what's going on in the Middle East, and let's push the energy security agenda and try to undermine the opposition to unconventional gas because we need it for energy security. Well, let me just remind everyone that INEOS have stated categorically that they are the largest license holder of petroleum exploration and development licenses here in England, particularly across the north of England. They now either own outright or have interests in excess of 1.2 million acres right across the north of England. And INEOS have stated categorically that they are not interested in mining the gas to put into the national grid. So the population of the UK are not going to get any benefit whatsoever from INEOS's unconventional gas activity. Their sole objective is to establish a cheap feedstock for their plastics and chemical plants. And as the world wakes up to the magnitude of the contamination, particularly of oceans, I gather there's absolutely a massive raft of discarded plastic in the Pacific, which of course is having a seriously negative impact on ocean life. And so as people start to wake up to the realization that plastics, whilst maybe extremely convenient, are just another form of the toxic legacy that this generation is leaving for the future. So hopefully that will also help raise awareness of Jim Ratcliffe's agenda, because of course INEOS is a privately owned company owned by Jim Ratcliffe. Outrageously, he was educated here in East Yorkshire at Beverley Grammar School, but his sole desire is to enhance his already obscene wealth. His reported personal wealth is in excess of £5.5 billion. And, you know, I mean, he's obviously a very capable entrepreneur. Sadly, of course, he's using those entrepreneurial skills for self-gratification and certainly not for the benefit of the wider community. So those parts of the country, and some of them are very much here in North Yorkshire, INEOS own a raft of licenses to the south and to the north, and massive amounts to the west. And so those communities, you know, please be very aware that you are being targeted by INEOS, by Jim Ratcliffe, purely so that he can enhance his personal wealth by reducing the cost of raw materials for their manufacturing facilities. So, you know, we are at a very, very interesting juncture here, and hopefully, you know, one or other aspects of this will trigger people's curiosity, and they will start to see that what's occurring here has enormous ramifications for the future. Now, another method by which the British government, of course, is trying to secure people's silence and acquiescence is effectively through bribery. And, of course, this has been discussed a number of times over the past few years, and the amounts of money that are being discussed are increasing all the time. And in fact, Quadrilla and Third Energy have put out communications to the local community saying, you know, we're seeking input as to how this money is spent. Well, the reality is that, you know, whatever money there is literally just dug up from their increasing piles of debt. And, you know, let's very much understand that nothing is free. There's no such thing as the proverbial free lunch. And what the intention here is to effectively not just buy the silence and the acquiescence, but effectively get a disclaimer from any future claim against this industry or the government or the local authority should things go seriously wrong. And this behind me, in my opinion, is literally a disaster waiting to happen. And, you know, I wouldn't obviously wish that on anyone, but, you know, maybe that's what's actually necessary to get this industry shut down once and for all in this country. We had the seismic events in 2011, which gave us a 16-month moratorium. Well, you know, every other country within the United Kingdom, you know, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have effectively introduced planning rules that make it impossible for this industry to establish a foothold. And you know, it is really now just down to the people of England to get a full house and shut it down right across the UK. But this money that's being offered, where's it coming from? Well, it's coming out of the pile of debt that these companies are building up. Why are they building up massive debt in this country? Basically so that they will never make a profit and therefore never pay tax. So when you hear the likes of Theresa May saying that, you know, we're going to create a wealth fund out of the profits generated by this industry, basically there won't be any. And, you know, just take a look on companycheck.co.uk, punch in the name of the company, and you will see their last reported financial status. And you will see that pretty much without exception, INEOS obviously has a very interesting corporate structure, so they're able to hide a lot of the debt that they use to facilitate their activities. But the smaller companies like Third Energy, like iGas, like Quadrilla, then although Quadrilla is a private company, but partly owned by AJ Lucas, and you take a look at where AJ Lucas is at, and these companies are not in good shape. In fact, if you or I owned these companies, then, you know, there's no question the banks would be calling in the loans, and we would effectively be driven into insolvency. So when the money is offered, it comes with the requirement to sign a clause that, one, says you're not going to disclose how much you've got, and two, that you are not at any future date going to make any claim against the company, regardless, whether it's property damage, whether it's impact on you or your family's health or your pet's health, then you're effectively signing away any right to pursue any recourse. And, the most outrageous example of this was Chesapeake Energy in the US, who had a massive blowout on one of the well sites. And obviously the toxic plume had a massive impact on the local community. And they literally put in the local paper and made available pizza vouchers so that, as compensation for all the grief that they had caused the local community, they were offering a pizza voucher. The problem was that the small print on this pizza voucher stated that obviously you had to put your name and address on it to make the claim, and if you submitted it to the pizza house and collected your pizza, then in return for the pizza you were waiving any right to any claim against that company. So don't think for 1 minute that these companies have any conscience. And of course the example of that we have in the UK is Rathlin Energy over in East Yorkshire, who damaged the fishing lake of Anthony Scott during the seismic testing. So this wasn't even part of the actual attempt to frack the well at West Newton. It was the seismic testing. They triggered a minor seismic event which damaged the integrity of his fishing lake, causing the fishing lake to recede and putting £140,000 worth of fish at risk. To the best of my knowledge, that fishing lake is still not usable. Rathlin Energy, of course, did initially acknowledge that they were responsible and that they agreed verbally that they will take full responsibility for the reparations, actually getting Yorkshire Water to pump water into the lake on a short-term basis. Unfortunately, of course, the water's chlorinated, so fish don't like that too much, so there had to be a limit to how much water went in. But then, after all the heat had died down, Rathlin Energy welched on that arrangement and said, you know what, actually, we might not have been responsible, so see you in court. So now, nearly 3 years on, there has still been no resolution to this. And of course, Rathlin Energy, again, owned by an offshore company, a parent company is Sutherland Holdings, which is based in Jersey. So once again, no possible profit being achieved in this country. Everything effectively going offshore. But David Montague Smith and Rathlin Energy have absolutely refused to acknowledge any responsibility for that damage to Anthony Scott's lake and, of course, his business. Now, meanwhile, in an attempt to keep another landowner quiet, Rathlin Energy did acknowledge that they had caused damage to some, I think, about 10 log cabins on a holiday estate in the area, and in an attempt to maintain cordial relations with a much larger landowner than Anthony Scott, they agreed to pay the reparations. And I absolutely have that as fact, because I had a conversation with the land manager of that estate. He confirmed for me that Rathlin Energy had indeed made those payments, and his comment was, so I consider them to be a good neighbour. I mean, regardless of the fact that they caused the damage, they paid for it. But a small private business owner, Anthony Scott, to this day, after 3 years, is still trying to get reparations through the courts. So if you're expecting an industry to rock up on your doorstep that actually is seeking to benefit the local community, think again. There are only 2 industries which I'm aware of, which effectively attempt to bribe the local communities into silence and acquiescence, and that's the nuclear industry and the unconventional gas industry. And of course there may be a correlation, because as I have addressed now on numerous occasions, Professor Fergus Gibb at Sheffield University is on point working on the research to use deep boreholes such as this 10,000 feet well behind me as disposal facilities for toxic nuclear waste. And despite me raising this issue over the last 3 years, both Radioactive Waste Management and the British government, who have been asked the question, refuse to state categorically that there is no intention at any future date to use a network of deep boreholes across the north of England for the disposal of toxic nuclear waste. So right now, we are still, more than 2 weeks later, on the cusp of Kirby Misperton being fracked. The first frack to occur in the UK since the moratorium was lifted in December of 2012. So, you know, the fat lady might be warming up, but she ain't yet singing. So there is still the opportunity to contact Greg Clark and share not just your own views, but do a bit of research, link into the scientific studies, show that the wider population are not just responding to the negative comments of activists, that they are doing their research, just like most of the activists in the local community here. They are doing their research. They have a phenomenal breadth and depth of knowledge about the damage that this industry has caused wherever it has established itself right across the globe. So we are on the cusp. And even if Greg Clark does sign this off, if this frack does go ahead, we will be down here, we will be live streaming or videoing and getting the information out and letting people see what's occurring here at Kirby Misperton. And then obviously the local community will be keeping their fingers crossed that there is no damage, that there is no blowout, no damage to fault lines causing seismic events. But I know some may consider it perverse, but that's perhaps what we need. We need to show this industry for what it is. Effectively, a bunch of cowboys trying to make a fast buck, but only for themselves, not for anybody else. So please do your own research, and I appreciate the gods holding off the rain briefly, while I'm standing here in the field adjacent to the well site at Kirby Misperton. So if you are in the area, or even if you fancy a day out, please come down and join us either at the gates of the Kirby Misperton well site, or and bring your wellies, come along to the Kirby Misperton protection camp and come and have a chat with us and share a cup of tea, and we can discuss this industry and perhaps the next steps going forward. So thanks a lot for joining me on this rather hazy Tuesday morning, and fingers crossed the rain holds off, and it might, actually the temperature's not too bad, so maybe we'll get a blast of sun when it burns through this mist. So thanks for joining me this morning, and we'll catch you again, if not tomorrow, then later in the week. Thanks a lot.